Let's cover the cardiovascular system, and we'll start by looking at the Microscope slides, the histology of the different components, and we'll look first at the pump, the heart, then the vessels, we'll look at arteries and veins, and then the actual fluid, a blood smear. As we look at cardiac tissue, specifically the myocardium, we're focusing on the muscle tissue. Remember, there's 4 types of tissue in the body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. For muscle, there's 3 types: skeletal, smooth, and then lastly cardiac. So we're learning that cardiac tissue. And it's very similar to skeletal muscle, except you see a lot more branching of the cells when we look at how they're combined to give us that ability to contract over time. And the difference with skeletal versus cardiac is cardiac tends to contract all as one big unit. For skeletal, though, it can change depending on the type of actions that I'm coordinating within my body. We can tell a big difference from skeletal and cardiac based on these large dark lines that we call intercalated discs. And when I look at intercalated discs, it's showing me that it's a boundary from one cell to the next. And these cells are all our cardiocytes, so all of our muscle cells of the heart. If you remember, when we covered our different types of cellular attachments, an intercalated disc is that cellular attachment for the heart, but it's blended into different types of junctions. Earlier in the course, we tend to cover the way we attach cells together. This was a previous video that I've done to describe how do we join cells, how do we attach them, and these are cellular junctions. And if you remember, when I used an example for gap junctions, I discussed the heart. But the heart has multiple types of junctions within that intercalated disc. So it'll have adherens and desmosomes for that strength. Desmosomes are helping to attach the cells. They're going to contract 3 billion times over my lifetime. I have to be able to coordinate that and keep them intact to where it's a coordinated muscle contraction. Adherens, similar in strength, that they bind some of the proteins. When we look at some of our actin and myosin, the actin protein filaments, to be able to bind them, again, to provide us that strength. And when we discussed gap previously, gap junctions is that space in between the 2 cells that allows for that communication, specifically movement of ions, to have a well-coordinated muscle contraction and relaxation for the heart itself. So within an intercalated disc, I find these types of cellular attachments or junctions. So this should be a review for you, because when we put a bunch of cells together, we have tissues, and we're describing those intercalated discs. When we look at intercalated discs, I only see this in cardiac muscle. I don't see this in skeletal muscle. I don't see it in smooth muscle. I do have actin and myosin when it comes to looking at our myofilaments or protein filaments for all 3 muscle types. When we look at skeletal, I have all of these lines that go light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and to me they look like fish scales. But all of this is indicating when we have our I bands and A bands, but it contains those myosin and actin filaments. So we see these same striations within skeletal muscle. The difference with cardiac is we have more branching of the cells, but specifically these intercalated discs. So all these little dark lines are indicating intercalated discs, the junction from one cardiocyte to another. So each muscle cell is bound by that intercalated disc. And then I see all of this that indicates the nuclei. So all of these round circles here, and I can have more than one nuclei for each of these muscle cells, but these are all my nuclei, these dark rounded sections. So when I look at cardiac tissue, remember we're identifying based on how we connect them, and that's that intercalated disc. We bind the cells, and all of these cells have somewhat of cellularity. It's just a bunch of cells together because we're focusing on this layer, the myocardium. So this is cardiac tissue. Then we move on to looking at vessels. These are arteries and veins, and they can get smaller. We'll talk about that in the next video. And then we also focus on the fluid, which is a connective tissue, my blood. This is cardiac tissue.